basically, Anish, your broad thoughts on this idea. Everyone's been talking about how PPI licenses, prepaid payment instruments for people who aren't in with the technical language. It's basically used for digital wallets and also for prepaid cards, like a Metro card and things. But in the context we're talking about, it's mostly when we're talking about digital wallets like Paytm, MobiKwik, PhonePe. So now that RBI has kind of made it possible for them to be interoperable, you can send money from a wallet to any other wallet, to any potential any bank account using UPI, and you can have up to 2 lakhs in a wallet and so on and so forth. Just broad things. What do you think about people talking about this being good for neobanks?
Sure. Firstly, Pranav and Arti, thanks for having me on this panel. Maybe like I'll take a step back, at least as a entrepreneur, mostly from the as a personal experience as an entrepreneur. Like probably it is 2013-14 is what we started actually hearing more about the wallets. Even the wallets used to exist much before that. The PPA license, I think, come up. I don't exactly remember, but it's somewhere in 2008 is what I think the first RBI guidelines on a PPA wallet license. Before that, it was mostly the players like OxyCash and EBS. Sorry, Epix used to. I mean, I think it's OxyCash, Oxygen, and
Oxygen.
Yeah, right. Which used to operate even without a license, and then the RBI came in on board. But I think mostly, even for a Paytm wallet, even before the demonetization, at least the Uber journey, when they started integrating with that, that's when at least on the premium, the tier 1 cities, people actually started using wallets because Uber wanted that seamless checkout experiences, basically, which in India, because of two-factor credit cards was not offering. And obviously, as the demonetization started, then Paytm started. But then when the UPI rails came in, and that's where, like, while there could have been a larger opportunity for PPI, it's always constrained by the challenges, whether it is the KYC rules, basically the limited 10,000 rupees or the 1 lakh rupees every month, which was put a limiting factor, whereas UPI made it easier for anybody to link their existing bank account. So people doesn't have to actually put it as a separate account and things like that. Now, it has come a long way. Having said that, still in many use cases, apart from the established players, whether it is MobiKwik or Paytm or MobiKwik, there has been like a lot of action happening still on the prepaid wallets, which is not really coming out. For example, it could be for expense management use cases, which has been powered by the banking partners through various fintech providers or various service providers. Use cases in terms of like benefit wallets, benefits, food coupons or benefit for various benefit programs, etc. Now, with the new relaxations or like the new changes which is actually brought in by the regulator, I feel like this gives us more flexibility in terms of the more fintechs to create programs. I would not look at fully from a neo-banking perspective as well, because ultimately, what is a neobank? So there are like, just for the sake of, I mean, this is also not defined very clearly. Everybody has their own versions of how do they define neobank, challenger bank, and I think we should actually start a little bit from the basics of that, right? So at least from my understanding, basically, or one, definitely there are like challenger banks or neobanks which has gone for a license, for example, a Paytm, or there could be N26 in a European market where the licensing is there. Then there are the over-the-top players, basically, which is the ones like kind of like an open or our equivalents in other markets where they ride on the license of an existing banking partner. And the third, obviously, is that bank setting up their own subsidiaries, which is like their own, like a DBS DigiBank kind of model as well. Now, some of the neobanks, even globally, they ride on the wallet like, or the, for example, in Europe, there is a specific regulation which actually, without a banking license, but there is a payment institution license where you can actually hold money and do that. Some of the players actually operate on that model where they club in an IBAN or a account number, basically.
Right. I think Revolut does that. And I think Nubank as well in Brazil is a similar kind of it's a licensed entity, but it's not a banking license.
Right. So a lot of those players actually do that part. Now, mostly for aspirational or to create the larger end use cases, I do feel what I had seen, at least from the most of the fintechs which I speak to, or like other aspirational or new banking players, they always try to get the white label savings account or current account when they don't have a license, because it doesn't come with the restrictions. Basically, even if you extend this 1 lakh to 2 lakhs, basically, it's still restrictive in some shapes. But this can also help in certain segments. For example, like we have seen like neobanks targeting only at students, basically, for teenagers, basically, or maybe specific use cases, maybe like for blue collar payouts, basically, where this 2 lakhs is good enough, good enough as well. So specific cases, this is good. And the other part is the interoperability part, basically, which also means like, you can have now your own IFSC code, you can have your own UPI handle. This will lead to what you call more flexibility in terms of new entrepreneurs. The entry barriers gets reduced because you are not fully dependent on the bank, because even the existing PPI license holders would expose this as an API. Now with on one side, we should also by the way, right now, anybody talking about fintech, it's like now it's becoming a bit confusing because a lot of actions are happening. We're actually at a period where like now there is on one side, people are talking about embedded finance or API banking. Then we are talking about neo banking, digital banking as well. And so sometimes like, for somebody like a layman, many times this gets confused, but some of these things are interrelated, right? For example, now with every corporate wanted to embed financial services, basically they can take actually an API from a PPA wallet provider, some of this embedded through an API banking provider. They can create their own models around it, basically. For example, school ERP provider wanted to offer white label savings account to students to cultivate the habits of saving. So to like a DPS bank can have a DPS school account. So they can actually utilize this infrastructure of this through some of this place. So definitely this is a welcoming change. And more importantly, I'm looking at this more from a regulator now taking a positive approach towards all of those things. Because if you, unlike the cryptocurrency or a Bitcoin, where the regulator has been always, we all know like now what's the regulator stand. In India, and Indian globally, if you look at open banking or API banking, which lead to like things like neobank and digital banking, the regulator has been very positive. In Europe, it was forceful regulation, the PSD2, I would say. But when it comes to, if you come to the Asian markets in Singapore and all, they had actually taken an approach, the regulator taken an approach to, promote that thing. And India, RBI has been indirectly working with the bank, saying that okay, API banking should be extended, more fintech bank collaboration should happen. And along with the PPI guidelines, you should also correlate the PAPG guidelines, which the regulator has again, few months back that actually come up with, which was actually supposed to be June 30. I think it's got extended to September 30 as well, which allows anybody, an entity, intermediary who actually collects money, store money, and do payouts. The certain guidelines basically should come under the regulatory ambit, basically, which means that you're in the AML and things like that. So while the today's discussion topic is primarily around PPI, I would actually feel that we should actually combine these things and look from a regulator's perspective, that regulator is now trying to bring in more fintechs under the regulations, which is a good thing, basically, which means like, for a last 2 to 3 years, we are operating under a gray area in something. I mean, for example, API banking, we are regulated through the banks. Banks were given the guidance, like you should follow these things, things like that. Right. So that's the way in which generally, like as a starting, which I would actually look at this from a very high level point.
So I have a question here, Anish. So Open has always been more or less an exclusive partner to ICICI Bank. You started with ICICI, and I think when I last did a story, like 90% of your business used to be from ICICI, right? So how does PPI changes things for you? Will you go for it, or will you be like, in a comfortable position where you are in right now?
Right. So Arjun, just wanted to correct a little bit. Today, Open works with almost 15 banks in India on the Open.money platform. Separately, we also run our white label product, Neobank, which allows banks to build their own branded digital bank. Almost 8 out of the top 10 banks in India, plus the majority of the small finance banks and the banks on the south, actually use our platform to build their own digital banks as well. So we are not we are bank agnostic, because we realized that okay, in India, if you have to build an entire equivalent of a digital bank, by the way, we can't call ourselves as a bank as per the RBI regulations as well. Even the term neobank itself, it can be called as a neo-banking platform, but you can't call ourselves as a bank, right? But to build such a thing, unlike a payment, unlike building a UPI app or a payment app, you need multiple components. You need the current accounts, you need to issue the cards, basically. So we realized that okay, you need to end up partnering with multiple banks, because no single bank can support you with the full infrastructure. So that's how we ended up partnering with multiple banks in the market. Now, I don't really directly see the PPI, whatever the relax or whatever the regulations, making much of a difference to Open, because we are focused more on the SME side of it. And if you really look at the PPI wallet, it's most consumer. The thing, there is still a lot of what you call, I would say, lack of clarity on can this be a business wallet, because only an individual can own a wallet basically. But then players like us, what we have, our expense management solution, which is dependent on a prepaid those things, which is a key part of our offering. So when a customer signs up on the platform, he or she or the company can issue prepaid wallets to attach with the card for expense management. So those things probably now, which gives us actually much more flexibility in terms of building our own just things, or going for a PPA license, or partnering with an existing PPA providers as well. But personally, from Open's perspective, I don't really see too much of a thing, because at the end of the day, our positioning to the customers is like, okay, this is a a better current account which is offered in partnership with our partner bank, which is a regulated entity. So
but what is the best way forward for most of the neobanks who might be looking at PPI as one of the option? Is it mostly, so we did recently a story on Revolut, right? So they are planning an entry in India. They have already entered with new CEO. So the point is, will the players go for a new license, or do you think, because there are so many companies who have kind of surrendered their license also, they are still surrendering? I was seeing Oxygen recently surrendering their license, PPI license. So do you really think that there will be acquisition in the space? How do you think it?
right. So, Aarti, I think this is also an important point, and specifically, you asked me specifically from an Open perspective, because we are on the B2B space, is what probably I mentioned about, we may not, it may not have a major impact, even though definitely it is actually welcoming change. But on the consumer side, I do believe that this gives a lot more flexibility or for the consumer focused neobanks, like the way if there are, like in India itself, we have like teenage focused neobanks where they provide bank account to students basically, or blue collar basically, and there could be multiple. I mean, it's all up to the creativity, and we can actually see, if you go to AngelList, you will actually see hundreds of neo-banking ideas actually centered around this thing. So for some of these players, and maybe like players like Revolut on the consumer side of the story, this could probably be like a good thing, because some of the if you look at players like Revolut, they try not to get under the direct, even though in some markets they operate with a partnership with the bank, but they try to actually fully control the experience part of it. For them, this gives a lot of flexibility, because you get your own IFSC code, you got your own UPI handle basically. Now the limits are also increased, like, right, the monthly limits and things like that. So those use cases there, and this will lead to a lot of acquisition basically. And why people have surrendered the license, probably because there was no business case basically. The B2C use cases, everybody was moving towards the UPI, and probably players like Paytm, because of the cloud and the existing user base, they are surviving basically, or MobiKwik for that matter. But if you look at the rest of the players, there is no use cases. I mean, they used to survey probably through other models like the expense management and things like that as well. But now some of these guys who already have a license, maybe this could be an opportunity for to get acquired, or for the others in the neo banking space, it could be like an opportunity to get this thing as well. The other interesting thought process is also that even on the business side of these things, while thinking aloud, maybe can a SME focused neo banking platform ride on the IFSC code and the account number as a routing account, basically, like what we have seen in the international markets. So those models may also keep evolving as we get more clarity on the regulations.
And there are a couple of questions from the audience.
I'll take a step back. I really want to ask this question.
Go for it.
PPI or no PPI? According to you, has neo-banking space really taken off in India? I mean, I think some of the players really got lucky that they raised, a decent amount of funding. But then 2020 and then 2021, we still know that there are so many neobanks yet to take off. So on the operation side, on really the scale side, and getting the first traction, do you really think that it is really making much of a dent in the market?
Right. So 2 points. Firstly, you asked about whether it's a PPI or non-PPI, how does neobanking is evolved, right? So maybe this may not be directly related, but I'll just come to this answer. But today, like, it's not necessary that you need to have a PPI license to get this benefit, because any bank today can operate as a PPI. I mean, they come under these things, and you would have seen, like, in the early 2012, 2013 period, free charge when they initially didn't have a license, it's right on the license of Yes Bank, right? And all the banks are now ready to expose that part as well. And today with banks which is offering APIs for savings account and current accounts, like the same way in par with PPI with more the things, mostly players would actually go for the bank APIs than having this thing as well. I mean, there's actually a conflicting this point which I'm making basically, but I'm just like the options are now, I do see people will preferably go more towards a bank a savings account than a PPI for a player, because it give you more flexibility and control, right? And even from an end customer's perspective also, the feeling of having like a savings account means like, he can then put his probably then their money over here, or rather than like a wallet where he can only keep that thing. So from a convenience perspective. Now, to your question on like, have neobanking really arrived in India? I would say like, there are a few players who would be like, for example, on the SME space, what we believe like, in the last 4 years, we now today have around 1 million customers, and we are seeing more adoption. And secondly, we are seeing a lot more competition coming into this thing, and everybody is actually seeing and solving use cases, basically, specific use cases. At least on the SME side, I do believe that okay, now we are ready for these things, and the growth is happening in multiple ways. It's not only about players like us, even banks now launching their own neobanks. Every bank which you talk today, they're talking about bank in a box concept, basically, where they realize that rather than the customer coming to my internet banking platform, I should go to where the customer transacts. That's the reason why banks are now trying to turn every accounting system software companies into a neobank. They're trying every payroll company to become a neobank, right? Or they are actually empowering non-fintechs to also become like digital banks, or separately they are actually building their own white label models as well. In terms of the consumer, I think players like Neo has actually done a very good job, so far. We need to look at it in two different, probably the neo banking phase one, or 1.0 and 2.0, basically, just for the sake of, the thing. So when players like us, whether it is Open, whether it is Neo, or like anybody like Razorpay, all of them entered. Our biggest challenge was that there's a lot of infrastructure challenges available. All the banks were not fully ready to support that. And it took us like 3 to 4 years to actually get into some shape at least. Because there was ambiguity in terms of regulations from a compliance perspective, basically, in terms of the tech, some of the things were not available. And this would actually, in terms of the business model, so a lot of these things got solved basically because of the industry slowly evolving. Like there's a lot of funding that has actually happened to this segment. Now, on the consumer side, I do believe this year is what you will actually see a lot of action, because if you look at places like Jupiter, or whether it is Epify, Finin, all of them just either just got launched or in the process of launching in the coming few months, and they only got it right now. And like I mentioned before this meeting, like actually I was telling Pranav that one of my colleagues who joined from another global neobank, I asked him like, why do people opt for consumer neobanks, and his answer was that in the market where in Europe, the traditional banks are now very advanced in terms of user experiences and the features. But then the customers, one example he just pointed out was that the customer doesn't have to have, or the millennial consumers, they don't want to have an account with a bank where their dad has a bank account, basically, right? So for a millennial, probably, when players like an Epify or a Jupiter, which offers like, features like how much you spend on Netflix, or, giving you different card numbers, which can actually use it to do the expenses, basically. Or like when you're actually sharing rent, for example, there's a neobank like Symbol in the US, where if you're actually sharing a flat and sharing, you can actually drag and drop and create a shared bank account, basically. We can actually use it for that particular period of time, right? So this, or, Symbol spend management solution. So most of the millennials, the problem is that by 15th of the month, they say that okay, the money is over, the salary is over, right? So if you say that okay, I want to save the 25,000 rupees this month, what Symbol used to do in the US is that every time you go to a Starbucks or a restaurant, it identifies from the location that you are in a restaurant. It says that, Arti, like you are in a Starbucks today, so spend only that $1 basically over here. or every time you spend for a coffee, a certain amount gets moved to a goal. For the goal could be like a holiday in Europe, basically, and certain money gets moved. So there's a lot of this type of experiences this newer neobanks would do. So it would be nascent at this stage on the consumer side, Arti, but this year we would actually see, because when the lot of these players have not even deployed their money. For example, if it is Jupiter or Epify or any of these players, when they start deploying these things, and you will see the same thing like Google Pay, and you can always like relate it to a Google Pay and Phone Pay, right? Every bank today has a UPI handle, I mean, UPI payment option, right? Do you prefer paying through your bank's UPI app, or you do prefer a Google Pay or a Phone Pay? That is the same thing which is going to happen on that on the neobanking space as well.
Since you raised a very good point, and I think it's a fresh debate happening in the industry about the bank bit, that banks are kind of going more aggressive and they want to do all by their own, right? So since you name, there is one a neobank that we know that were facing challenges with the banking partner. They had to change so many banking partners, and finally they are launching now. So banks are now kind of is it something that they want to do it right now on all by them, themselves, and and fintechs are really struggling to convince banks right now? What is happening with this tussle between banks and fintech in this neo banking space?
Right.
So I think just to jump in a little bit, we also have a question from Asta,
Right.
who works at Ikigai Law, which is along similar lines, which is, she's asking, these changes, basically the regulatory changes, which can be on PPI licensing, which can be on the whole payment gateway, payment aggregator kind of regulations, all of these things. How is this changing sort of the relationship or the agreements between fintech companies or the neobanks or others and conventional banks, large banks, medium-sized banks? How this kind of positive approach from the regulator is changing attitudes there, and how that's that's more of a broader ecosystem thing. What kind of shift do you see? Which also ties into this Arthur's question about how the banks are viewing these different business opportunities and also relationships with it.
Got it. So I think both Pranav, I don't think there is like every banks are actually trying to. There is actually like a conflict between fintechs and the banks. I mean, we hear this mostly in panel discussions, but but if you really actually in the industry, anybody who knows it, like in the global market, so banks have realized that one, there is definitely the bank needs to move ahead basically in terms of the better user experience. It needs to change the way it operates basically. For that, banks may take the approach of creating separate subsidiaries, creating a separate digital banking, separate branding, like the way in India SBI has done with there is like banks like Standard Chartered has created a separate brand, put the entire team in a separate office, basically like a co-working space and things like that. At the same, so that is one approach. Definitely, all the banks are trying. They are very clear that okay, I also wanted to move ahead with the change. This, at the same time, banks also realize that banking as a service, where I provide the infrastructure, which includes compliance, regulations, and the base services, and this is getting distributed by fintechs and non-fintechs now. It's also a huge opportunity. If I don't be in that space, it will also impact my profitability, because the world is moving towards a platform as a service, and more not only fintechs, corporates are now talking about embedding financial services. For example, an Uber says that, okay, I want to offer an Uber branded account to my drivers, right? So the question is like, do you want it to lose out on those 2 lakh drivers basically, or this thing, right? So every bank has taken 2 approaches. One, they have created a separate digital banking team basically. And then there is a banking as a service team. And in India also, majority of the banks I had actually seen, and I also specifically know, like, what Ardi was talking about, like, a particular provider probably who has to actually, I'll not comment on that part, but generally 90% of the banks in India has a separate API banking or a banking as a service unit. Some of the larger banks has around a 300-400 member team itself, one of the top 4 banks basically. And this always had existed before. So if you look at 2010 periods onwards, it's the RBL Bank and the Yes Bank, which used to power their APIs for almost all the fintech services. And the reason why probably, an RBL Bank is where it is today is also thanks to a lot of these partners, where it is mSwipe or like, Happy or all of this partners as well. And even before that, if you look at the early 2000s, when the premature version of fintech, payment gateways, what is a payment gateway? It's all about a bank partnering with a CC Avenue tech process or a bill desk, right? So, and they knew that, okay, this model has worked very well. So I don't really see there is actually there is a collaboration happening on one side where they want more partners to distribute. At the same time, within the bank, they also realize that I also need to create a digital property as well. There could be certain banks, which is mostly the smaller banks, taking an approach saying that, okay, I just want to focus only on the banking as a service model. And this is what exactly you're seen in US or Europe, wherein many of the likes of the Revoluts or the N26, whenever they don't have a license, you will always see they partner with a very small bank. It could be a community bank or a local bank with a license, because they only need their license from a regulatory perspective, right? They'll even put the infrastructure and build it. That is also happening in India right now. If you look at like some of the banks which doesn't have a large branch presence, or they are late in the market, they take this approach of they sit in the back there and offer the infrastructure. Banks like ICICI for that matter, or like Kotak for that matter, they on one side are building their own digital properties. At the same time, they also are working more and more with fintechs. So each of them is like complementing each other. I don't really see that any banker say that. There is only a handful of banks which would right now think, I will build this on my own. And I will also tell you one reason from a practical purpose, at least let's take from an SME banking perspective. What is SME banking is not about banking alone. That's where you have to bring in accounting, payroll and things. This is not a core forte of a bank. Like even if a bank has to take 60 engineers and like put a people to build a payroll system or a accounting system, it may not work. So the banks also realize that. So collaboration, it's going to be a collaborative approach, and that's what the industry is moving towards.
Right. And I think one interesting point also, you had mentioned that one of your kind of offerings is this white label banking kind of platform, which you actually sell to various banks who want to build out their own digital banking platform. So how exactly does this work? I mean, when you're saying a white label digital banking platform, this is, if they want to build up their entire digital banking thing, net banking or a user-facing thing, what exactly is that?
Right. So most of the banks now are saying that, okay, I wanted to offer service which is similar to what Open offers to its customers, right? You can't call it as neobank or digital bank, but service in the sense like a financial automation platform centered around a current account for that matter, right? And they feel that, okay, with the current implementation we have actually done from previously with some of the banks, we had seen that there is actually a 3x times increase in the number of deposits in terms of the engagement of the customers, because in our dashboard we provide a functionality where they can link their existing bank account from other bank accounts to see their balance and the statement. So the CFO, the finance team end up using this dashboard more. So that's where the engagement is there. They found and they also found that, okay, clients who are using payouts through the our dashboard, since this is being recorded in the ledger entry and ledger entry is getting automated, many times customers use it as a primary bank account. So that's the reason why, like, most of the banks are now interested in white labeling this solution. It's more about, currently every bank offers a plain vanilla bank offering. Like they have a current account, they have an internet banking where you can do fund transfer, view the balances, and few additional services. This is where platforms like us, whether it is Open or its competitors or anybody who's actually offering solutions, banks are now increasingly looking at deploying this type of solutions to add value to their existing product in terms of acquiring new customers, in terms of increasing the deposits, basically, etc. There are players like Finastra and Backbase, who's traditionally been building internet banking platforms. They're also now started adding these functionalities or modules, or even players like us, which had already built this thing. Now we are selling the bank that, okay, this is a good option for you, and bank good option for you to also to brand it under your brand name and sell to your base of customers.
Can you tell us, like, about the business model of some of the banks? See, in the SME space, we get it that, Razorpay got merchant first, and then they kind of monetize those merchants by giving them bank accounts, right? Open did the reverse. You got the piece first done, and then you got the merchants. So there was this. But again, I mean, there is some kind of what I remember that you were not charging, or maybe bank were not giving you any commission on the bank account opening. If I'm not wrong, that was the initial thing that was happening. But in terms of business model, has that evolved? I mean, has the kind of industry got that how they can monetize this entire piece, be it on the SME space or on the individual space?
Got it. So Ardil, answer this from a, I'll try to give a generic, answer on how this business models has been evolved. And globally, if you really look at the neobanking space, when you look at the, P&L of most of this neobank, especially when they don't have a license, because when you don't have a license, you can't play with your the balance, right, or the float, right, which is actually the bigger revenue model for most of the banks. So they always work on the interchange revenues. If there is a float, commission on the floats that you actually maintain with the partner banks, and of course lending, maybe through third-party NBFCs or through an FLDG model kind of a things. And then there could be the payment gateway, pay-per-use, and other value-added services, basically, whether it is consumer or SME. This has been the model that's been followed internationally. In India, as you said, a lot of this models are evolved a lot. For example, the interchange on the card issuance that always used to exist in the market, right, from the 2010 to 11, 12 onward, that still exists. You get revenue, fintech partners can get revenue on, you can up the transactions. For example, if you're offering a current account and then enabling customers to pay for salaries, that NEFT, RTGS, IMBS charges, you can actually make a markup on that because you get it from a base rate from these things. If you're offering payment gateway, obviously a small, I mean, it's very small, minor this thing. Now, the larger challenge here is that the float revenues, the regulator doesn't allow banks to, share that thing. In international markets, or generally in the markets where this is not allowed by regulator, there are always ways around in which banks
Workarounds that happens.
You would have seen in the prepaid wallet case in India also, there was actually restrictions earlier, basically, right? So banks have worked around it, like marketing things. And so those things will, in any markets, I'm not specifically talking to India because I can't talk about this thing, but those things are also slowly happening in around the world, wherever there is a restrictions, there is those things as well. It depends from banks to banks as well, but primarily that is one source of the business model. Secondly, players like us on the SME space, we do make money on the financial automation piece, where there are other players which has been already making money without a banking, right? It could be subscription, it could be, for example, a pay-per-use revenues when they file a GST returns or a TDS returns. Of course, wealth management and the lending. In fact, in lending and wealth is actually the major this thing. For players like us, we are probably in a very nascent stage when it comes to lending, because it's always been experiments that we're actually doing. But that's also primarily the reason, because all the 4 years, we've been building the rest of the things to enable that towards the lending, right? But what I'm hearing from generally in the industry, you would have probably, seeing is a lot of these platforms now, which has got built, the ecosystem, are doing really well on the lending side as well. With the, while you have actually, seen the traditional lending providers basically having huge NPAs basically, but some of the players who are actually started in the last 3 to 4 months basically actually are slowly scaling up, at least from what we hear from the industries to it as well. But going forward, lending would be one important thing, and the revenue sharing models which exist outside India exist in many ways. And even on the deposit float, I mean, things are changing a lot basically, and I do believe from a regulatory perspective also things will shape up. For example, on the PAPG, sorry, just one last point on the PAPG, this thing, there is actually a leeway for you to, I don't exactly remember or this thing, but I think that 30% you can actually move into an interest bearing account, which is allowed by the RBI itself. So technically things are changing even from a regulator perspective. And I do, and last point, sorry,
Sure.
I also believe from, at least from the informal interactions, at least from the industry, what we keep hearing is that even the regulators are both in Asia, both in India and other Asia, they're also looking at creating opportunities and sustainability for the fintech players as well.
So my question here would be, what the fintech lending players are not doing it right, the standalone players, right? That a neobank would be able to solve on the lending side. I mean, because
Right.
we are seeing, I mean, no matter how much they claim that we are scaling and we are doing, but we know the kind of NPAs on the consumer segment as well as on the SMB segment, right? So how will it be different, or how lending will be different, when done by a neobank in India?
Right. So, Ardi, let me take an example of, at least I can only speak from the SME side because, I don't have even too much insights into the B2C side of the business. And in my career, I've always been on the B2B side, right? So, there are like B2B SME lending providers, standalone NBFCs and the new age lending providers. And then there are like, players which is evolving, which is either probably payment gateways or players like us. Now, let's take an example of a player like Open. Today when Arti opens a bank account with us, you also connect your other bank accounts because you can actually view the balances. You manage your entire account payables and the receivables over here. If you're using Tally, you connect with that things. You connect your GSTN because I allow you to send you the reconciliation of how much was the input credit and the reconciliation part of it. You can go and you can also pay the challan for the GST and the TDS as well. Now, with your permission, like if I'm saying that, okay, hey Ardi, we also have a cash flow prediction module where we'll tell you like, the 6 months, what is your cash flow like? And we say that, okay, hey, Ardi, you have like only 4 months of cash flow based on these things. But here is a credit line that is available, which I underwrite based on all of this data because I have the AP, the AR, your Tally balance sheet data, your other bank account balances. Obviously, all of this with your consent only. This gives us better underwriting opportunities for anybody, for players like us, compared with a standalone lending partner, wherein you apply there, your only things was like the bureau scores, probably the social scoring mechanisms, and you have to underwrite. So this gives little more data. That's the reason why most of these NBFCs are also now partnering with other neobanks or neobanking platforms for this access to data part as well. Now, same model works with different I think, for example, payroll provider today now slowly offering salary accounts as a part of their offering, white label salary accounts. So technically they can also be called neobanks, right? If it was a payroll provider, but now they're saying, now he can build models wherein he can extend a employee credit 15 days in advance. But when the salary gets processed, he will actually divert that thing directly to as a repayment kind of a thing, right? So when you create a model of these things, there is a lot more control that you get in terms of underwriting. Even after underwriting, let's say in case of an Open, and this is one of the discussions with one of the public sector banks when we had white labeling discussions, one of the large public sector banks, they say that, okay, apart from dispersing this loan to the customer's bank account, if you can actually monitor for the signals whether he's defaulting on his vendor payments or his receivables are these things, then I can actually keep an eye on that particular customer as well, right? So this is the ways in which, like, globally as well, if you look at Brex or even other markets as well, for lending, this adds more value because more the data sources basically you're doing. And here the customer is not providing these data sources for lending, he's actually providing for his own financial automation. So, and I'll tell you another example. I mean, I'm not getting too much into the productization, but let's say an example of like a product where today in Open, like, if you connect your e-commerce, if you're an e-commerce seller on a marketplace, you connect your seller account, or if you're selling on one of the food aggregator platforms, you connect those accounts basically. We tell you that, okay, we help you with the reconciliation part of it. When your money comes in, how much was your commission? What was the commission the platform took? What is the GST? But then it also gives me an opportunity to give you an early settlement because some of these marketplaces gives only a settlement every 15 days. But I know that this money is anyway coming because of these things, right? So this is where, like, some of these data points by virtue of financial automation, also helps us to better underwrite the customers.
This is one question from, but I think not really on neobanking, but surely on the lending side. So from Shrish Ways. So he's saying that, it is regarding one of your angel investments, Kudos Finance. Can you share your investment rationale behind the investment and how you see Ocean affecting the lending infrastructure as a service players such as Kudos and Apollo Finvest?
Right. So primarily, like, firstly, I want to say that this was a personal investment, and I'm not an active angel investor, but mostly from, as an entrepreneur, like, who was, been seen the journey of how tough it was, like, for me to like raise funds. So whenever there's an opportunity, irrespective of sometimes business models, like, you like an entrepreneur and you do a very small investment as into that. But what I really liked from, so there is nothing, there is no strategic reasoning behind from Open's perspective. It's a personal investment. In case of Kudos, Pavitra and the team has actually done a very good job in terms of building that lending as a service, and they're actually now becoming like a infrastructure that can be powered by anybody. It could be like an Amazon or like anybody who wanted to lend rather than going into that part. That's the rationale behind the investment. Now, how a platform like an Oken how the impact plays like Kudos or Apollo Finvest. In fact, Open has been one of the early volunteers working closely with Oken basically to create that framework. But I do believe that it's still few months away or few years away from getting into that right shape, because of it requires a lot of moving parts or different entities to come together to rebuild that ecosystem. While we have built probably Oken has built the foundation, it's there, and I do believe that there is a lot more larger opportunities for the standalone infrastructure players, whether it's Apollo Finvest or players like Kudos, as they are moving towards infrastructure as a service or lending as a service, wherein like tomorrow, maybe a Flipkart or an Amazon is a larger example. A small e-commerce player wanted to offer a lending to those things, they can actually plug in easily and go live. And in some cases, the ready-made, which is what the Oken's objective was also there, where there'll be multiple NBFCs and the lending providers or the banks on the back end who can actually approve this thing and things like that. But most of this standalone players like e-commerce platforms or fintechs or non-fintechs who wanted to offer lending now would have their own customized requirements, where some of these platforms would be more flexible to support their business models and the requirements. So both will coexist. I don't really see that as a strong threat to each other.
Okay, I think we have a couple more people who would like to ask questions. They've raised hands. I just pick Neha first. Hi, Neha. Hey, you can speak and give out your question.
Hi, Anish. Can you hear me? Hi, Anish. Hi, Pranav. Hi, Aarti.
Hi.
Hey, Neha.
Hi. So, Anish, this is just a follow-up question. This asked from Ikigai Law, and I asked you a question on the relationship between banks and neobanks, and how the realm is changing. And where I was coming from is that basically earlier, as you would have noticed, banks had a very one-sided agreement and arrangement favoring banks, right? Like whenever you would receive those arrangements or agreements, they would obviously have one-sided clauses only favoring banks. But now, as as we represent our clients regularly, represent our new banking clients regularly, we are seeing a shift where the arrangements are more mutual, where new banking partners and tech partners are seeing in the capacity of a partner rather than just a vendor. So do you agree that shift is happening, where banks are seeing you more of as a partner than just an outsourced service provider or a vendor, which was the case earlier? And do you see this shift picking pace as the time goes by, in the sense that in coming couple of years, do you see this trend picking up, where you maybe will reach a point where you will be able to dictate some of the terms, or get some of the terms accepted from bank side, and the arrangement would have a flavor where you and the bank will come to the table at the same capacity and run an entire financial services program? So that's my follow-up question on this. And thanks a lot for all the insights that you gave so far. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. So Asta, before coming to your question, I think ideally, even though it is tough for people like us to deal with the strong, legal challenges, dealing with the legal department of the banks, I would be personally more worried, but if they relax more, because at least on one part at least on the legal and other things, I feel like the banks should still not loosen up basically. I know there are cases where the banks always try to, try to, control or take advantage as well. That is a different story. But generally what's happening in the last 3 years or 4 years, there's a lot of change in the thought process, not only from the legal team, the compliances, the way in which they looked at things, because the entry barriers are now reduced a lot because of all of those things. Earlier, only very handful of privileged players or companies would get access to a bank. Or many times when you go with a new idea, the compliance team would say that, okay, this won't work, I can expose as APIs basically. But now that has drastically changed, because the the banks have internally realized that, okay, now, creating this banking as a service or bringing this partner-led model is critical. And many times when they had set up this as a separate P&L unit, they realized that. And that obviously has impacted a lot in terms of like, the way in which the attitude has changed from the things, even on a legal, when you deal with the legal teams as well, banks are more flexible. It could also be, but I don't really see that, it will change, as they also now more understand. I'll give you a simple example. When I'll not name the bank, but when we gone live with 5 banks, the 6th bank, so before going live, every bank would do an audit. The auditor from the bank would actually come, and this is the first time that he was actually going out of the bank to do an audit. So the person came to the office, and then he found that we are using the Gmail, the Google email, basically for all our email communications. And he was like, no, this is not allowed. You need to go back to Outlook because this is not secure, right? Probably but we try to convey him that it is not a Gmail, it's enterprise edition of Google, right? Second thing is that the Bluetooth was enabled on all the machines, basically, for people to on the laptops. And the third was like, when there was like, Wi-Fi was like enabled on that thing, and this is not there in the banks, right? Every employee could connect to the Wi-Fi as well, right? So then he actually raised this thing, and for like 3 to 4 months we were not able to actually move ahead with this project. But then later, after a year again, internally, when a different team from the bank actually came from, we were surprised to know that, okay, they actually had come up with the checklist. They said, okay, even in Google Enterprise, there is actually like a separate edition, basically, which you need to upgrade and do that. But they actually now have worked around and going through, these are policies that you actually need to follow. And so there's a lot of change, drastic change that is happening, which is driven by the market, even internally as well. Now, legally, I think, we all need to understand, at least from a fintech perspective, basically, as that at the end of the day, there is a lot more at stake for a bank. While we always in the forums, in these things, bash banks, saying that, okay, these are like very legacy and all. Any small error that happens from a fintech provider, like the way in which RBI or the regulator actually finds the bank, or the reputation, or even the license is at stake, right? So that's the reason why they're actually doing that. But a smaller bank, that's also, again, like there is also a difference between the different types of banks. So the larger banks still like probably like are try to get things their way, whereas there are like the newer, nimble, smaller banks which want to work with this. They're very flexible. They try to understand, they're more reciprocative in terms of like your needs and things like that, and the same reflects with their legal teams as well. So it varies from bank to bank, and this is where, rather, so for a new player or a new fintech, rather than going directly to a bank, you go to a aggregator like an API banking platform, whether it is Zeta or like, whether it's like other providers, or even Open, we have a separate business unit wherein like, they have done all the hard work of this, like the standardized agreement, standardized, compliance and things like that. And later, after, probably when you become established, you move directly to a bank, kind of.
Pranav, do you have a question? I have one last question to ask.
Go for it. I don't see any more questions from
Yeah.
the audience. Guys, everyone, please, if you have anything. Actually, there is Jana Satra would like to say something. I don't know who's got it. Okay. No, yes, after you go ahead then.
Great. So yeah, I really don't want to miss out on the question, Anish, about the fundraise, right? That Open is planning. Where are neobanks burning money, if we may ask so? Like, of course, the consumer side I can still understand, but on the SME side, or maybe you can touch upon both the neobanks. But yeah, where are they burning a lot of money? Because today also we saw Neo acquiring again one more wealth management personal finance app, right? And I think most of the neobanks, I think most of the acquisition are on the wealth management side. So I'm really curious to understand that how is that piece really important for the neobanks? How is that very important piece, maybe as a revenue piece, or on the business side, if you can explain that. And yeah, on the fundraise, I mean, if let's say $100 million or something for a neobank.
Got it. So, Aarti, like in terms of as we told about, for a market like India, where you don't have a direct licensing at this point of time, since you have to look at like not the balance sheet for your revenue models, that's where lending and wealth management becomes important for any neobank, whether it is SME. Because if you really look at the SME market currently, as per regulations, you can't earn interest basically on a current account, right? At the same time, larger companies, whether it's a startup or even an evolved company, they would have treasury management solutions where they earn 5% to 7% through various instruments. Now, what about like a small SME trader who just has 3 lakhs balance? Can a neobank or a platform help them basically to sweep in the funds in the night, or like create smaller pockets before the salary day comes in, the money comes back and they can pay the salaries, kind of treasury management? So that's where like on the SME side. Similarly on the consumer side as well, right? For example, you are able to better negotiate with your banking partners when you are bringing this millennial customers and saying that if they want to buy an iPhone, I'm creating a gold-based option and able to create that fixed deposit or a wealth that. So that's the reason why like you would see a lot of acquisitions on the lending and the wealth side, in terms of underwriting, in terms of like players who already have a base of customers for various reasons, basically, right? Now, it all again depends on like what is it core for you. For example, in Open, around a few months back, we acquired a company called Octobase, which is the largest GST automation platform in the country. What it brings to us is like, one, the capability of because if you look at Open, we bring in banking, payments, accounting, and compliance together in one unified platform. One area where we were lacking was on the GST and the TDS automation. Now with this player which has already built the integration with the government systems, that adds a lot of value. Secondly, they had actually cracked the market of directly offering solutions to tax practitioners, which is around 30,000 of them, and then they have 1 million customers as well. So for us, basically, one is about expertise. Secondly, the team. For example, CEO, he was head of cloud analytics at Apple, and then their team was like really senior. So one is a team. Third party is like access to a newer market basically as well. So these are the factors which we looked at, and same thing would have been like what a Neo or like any of these players would look like, either for the quality of the team or the value part as well. Now, in terms of the fundraising, specifically like globally, consumer side, mostly, as you rightly said, the money goes in customer acquisition. And I do believe like in India, probably it could be like around 6,000 rupees for a B2C. And I may be wrong basically, but that is my sense, somewhere around that for an acquiring a customer as well. So you need a lot of war chest basically if you are in the consumer B2C space. In terms of the B2B, and if you look at Open as well, we raised our last round of funding around probably around close to 1.5 years back from our Series B. We still have probably like 35 months of runway left, in the sense like money left in the bank, because we never like go very aggressively in terms of spend. We're always like very controlled and things like that, because we are built in the building stage basically, right? Obviously, now once you actually have built this entire infrastructure or the platform product, complete the cycle, now it's all about like, and when we have now 1 million base of customers, a lot of you need to now take that into user base into probably 5x basically, like in a particular period of time basically. You also now realize that, okay, as a platform is scaling up, you need to scale up your team. So probably you may have like today a 400-member team, but in the engineering on the product side, you may need to actually increase the team. Now with directly coming under the PAPG guidelines of the RBI, your AML, your fraud, and the rest teams needs to be operated. So these are the areas where probably players like us would be doing it. Currently, for us, fundraising is like an ongoing activity. I mean, we never have the need to raise, because we are always at a larger runway kind of a things. But whenever there's a right opportunity, we are not averse of like taking this thing. So at this point, there is nothing I can confirm on like the current fundraising or anything. Like the last raise was like probably 18 months back.
So 6,000 is per customer acquisition on consumer side. What's on the SME side?
It again depends basically from player to player. I'll not give I'll give a generic thing. There are companies which has efficiently done it, like around a few companies I would say like 300 rupees basically. There are companies which has done for 6,000 to 7,000 rupees as well in our space basically. What I'm talking about is like, it includes payment gateways and players like us. So it also a lot depends on how the way in which the approach which you take, and mostly people who are coming from the payment gateway backgrounds, there you never had a feet on the street. So you always have to acquire the customers through digital channels. And when in digital itself, you focus a lot more on organic channels rather than inorganic channels. For example, content, influencer network, community, and things like that. So companies which come from those backgrounds, still their cost of acquisition is very less. Whereas companies that actually followed a heavy feet on the street led models, there the cost is like very high basically.
Sure, I think this is it from, okay, there is some question about, has,
I think it's a little late, but it's a very quick question. It's a bit,
yeah, has
has
you
Open
established,
basically,
established a NBFC to enable lending? Yes, I think everybody is going for an NBFC license. What about Open?
Right. So currently we work with my third-party partners basically, which we write on their license or the lending as a service for our various lending activities. At this point, we don't have an NBFC license.
But are you applying? I mean, like, have you applied for it?
We're not applied because there is a lot of right now, probably like with the new licenses, from a regulator side, there is other thing. So at this point of time, everybody is doing a wait and watch approach on that.
Some last minute questions coming up. Thought process on Starling Bank-like marketplace model in India?
I think, as I told, like this neobanking is not about just one or two players. Basically, you will see different flavors and different niche players coming up. There could be players which focuses on a marketplace like an approach where multiple banks can actually come there. Basically, that is there, or it could be where in case of like SMEs, not exactly a banking marketplace, but there are like aggregation of different services on an app store model, basically what when Revolut has an app store kind of a thing. So these models will actually I think there is like it all depends on which segment which you're actually focusing on, what is an issue you're actually focusing on. There are like, it's very difficult to say that whether something works or not in the market.
I think we should have asked this question, but we somehow missed, and it's an important question. So how exactly does interoperability apply to PPIs that are issued in form of cards? Should they give options to users to receive and send money to other PPI card via card networks? I mean, I think we also had this question, right, Pranav? I mean, how the interoperability works. Is it like, wallet to bank, wallet to wallet, wallet to UPI? Is there a clarity on this interoperability thing yet?
I just replied to him in the chat since we have to wrap things up, but I'll just quickly go over it. Is that it seems to be a little, it's not absolutely clear right now because interoperability doesn't work at the moment.
Right.
RBI has given a deadline for March 2022, but they seem to indicate that it's mostly through UPI that it should happen.
Right. For now, more from I'm again like, I'm not even talking more from a back-end technology or from a process perspective, what can it work is like, because at the end of the day, a card, right, like a Visa or a MasterCard, whatever a card it is just one of the instruments to take the money out through a spend on a wallet. Now, when in a wallet, when RBI would be talking about interoperability, it would be meaning that they would be part of the NEFT RTGS network, which means like you'll get an IFSC code and IMBS and a UPI code. Now, if you have to move money from your card, technically what you have to do is like you move money from the wallet to another, you do a fund transfer to another IFSC account where it's a Paytm wallet, it can do that. So card interoperability already in the sense like, it's linked to the base wallet basically. Card is just one of the payment mechanisms basically. So, I think RBI is very clearly defined that, okay, they can participate in the, you can get an IFSC handle and a UPI code. So that once you join the network, then the interoperability is taken care of basically.
Right.
Makes sense.
Okay, great. I think, this is about it. We have to wrap up now. Thanks so much, Anish, for being here and answering all the questions. It's been pretty eye-opening. I'm sure, especially for people who are just curious about what all is happening in this whole new banking kind of space, which is very vague and amorphous. It's like a term that could be anything. It's been good, I think.
Yeah, so, great conversation, Anish. Really, thank you so much for joining us, I would say, and, agreeing to be part of this. And wish you all the best for your new fundraise, I would say.